Good evening, good afternoon. My name is Niko, host of the political radio show Mi Casa, Su Casa. And today we are about to have a really good time. Now, I can understand why some people think I will be upset because it's been a pretty crazy week. And I'm sure most of you know what I'm talking about. And for those of you who are in my audience and who don't know what I'm referring to, I strongly urge you to follow my Facebook, Niko, Niko, House, House. And you put the D in the middle, and that's where you'll be able to find me at. Or you can follow my Twitter at Niko, Niko, CSFB. And you can definitely be caught up in all of the drama, as it were. So we have a few topics that we're going to discuss today. We're going to talk about the Justice Democrats, and we're going to try to figure out what the hell they're doing, because at this very moment, I no longer have any idea what they're doing. And we're also going to discuss about Claudia Stauber from Cabin Talk and Debbie Luzigman from Sane Progressive, quote unquote, and a little thing I like to call white fragility. I wish I can coin the term, but I can't. And we're also going to talk about one Justin Stewart and in his unfortunate situation out there in North Carolina right now. And we're also going to talk about a little bit of Bernie Sanders, and we're going to talk about some cognitive dissonance amongst progressives and some hurt feelings amongst progressives that need to kind of get dealt with before we can ever move forward in our progressive movement. So, first of all, as most of you all know at this point, I am not a fan of Justice Democrats. And it's not that I'm not a fan of the candidates for Justice Democrats. And it's not that I'm not a fan of the overall idea for that particular party and that specific situation. But what I am not a fan about when it comes to Justice Democrats is the fact that it is a multi-million-dollar media conglomerate that is backing the Justice Democrats. And for those of you who don't know what the Justice Democrats are, the Justice Democrats is an organization started by the Young Turks, more specifically Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk, where they essentially endorse candidates who adopt this platform of progressivism. It sounds great, right? Except for when you go back and think about the fact that, well, TYT is a media corporation, and they play a significant role in how people view particular political parties, candidates, etc., etc. This is unacceptable to me, and I've said this time and time and time and time and time again. And that is because you shouldn't be wishing for the success of one party as if it is absolutely unequivocally better than the other at this point. Let's be very clear about this. There is almost no difference between the Democratic Party overall and the Republican Party overall. Now, what most people don't get is that there are actually progressives on all sides of the political spectrum. There are progressives on the left, and there are progressives on the right. There's a governor right now in Massachusetts who considers himself Republican, but is a crazy environmentalist, for example. So it seems to me that we are kind of in a conundrum, because if you're going out of your way to say that you're going to be part of this Justice Democrats, quote unquote, revolution, then you're pretty much saying, I'm going to do whatever I can to ensure that Democrats get elected, not progressives, not independents, not those who wish to see good things for all American people, but those who want to see good things for the Democratic Party. And that's not okay. It's not okay because when you are a journalist, independent or otherwise, you have a responsibility to remain objective. The very integrity of your message, the very belief that we can go to journalism to find out exactly what we need is dependent on your objectivity. And once you financially invest yourself in the success of one party over another, you are no longer financially independent. You have skin in the game. And so I have been against Justice Democrats for some time. Like I said, and most of you did know this, but like I said, I'm not always against, I'm not necessarily against all the candidates, but I found another problem with their system, as it were. So there's one gentleman running out of Illinois named Anthony Clark, a great guy. young, very well spoken, very intelligent, has nonprofits in District 7 of Illinois, or runs a nonprofit out of District 7 in Illinois. He's gone back to teach out of District 7 in Illinois. Considers himself a progressive, just overall stand-up guy, right? Sounds fantastic, right? Let's run him. Let's back him right now. Everybody jump on the Anthony Clark train. Now, here's the issue with this. The issue with this is that Anthony Clark is running in a district that another progressive already is an active incumbent in. And this isn't just a guy who is claiming to be progressive. No, we're talking about someone who is he's 70 years old. He's been in office since the mid-1990s. His name is Danny Davis. He's part of the Democratic Socialists for America, and he has been for over 2 or 3 decades. He's been fighting for the Fight for 15 movement. He's fighting for Medicare for all. He's fighting for unions. Like the man. Oh, and did I forget to mention? So Anthony Clark's black, but this guy is also black. So there's almost. So the one thing that it's said about him, which Anthony Clark brought up on my YouTube channel, is that he endorsed Hillary Clinton. Now, I will say this. Do I approve of that? No, I do not. But if you're fighting for Medicare for all, you're fighting the fight for 15, you're fighting for all the progressive platform, the progressive issues, and you've been calling yourself a democratic socialist since God knows when, I think I can overlook that one thing. Now, I get what some people would say, and I actually tend to agree with this. Well, isn't it good to have that kind of competition to keep candidates fresh, to keep their morals in check, so that we're always kind of putting them in the spotlight? And I agree with that. I'm not speaking from a moral superiority standpoint, like what should we do? I'm speaking from a politically strategic standpoint, because people have invested thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in this. TYT has invested thousands of dollars in this, in time in this, and they're setting these candidates up thinking that they have an opportunity to win. In this scenario, they don't. And Anthony Clark took exception to what I said on my YouTube channel, even though I praised him. But he was a little upset about it. Well, I don't know if he was upset about it, but he said, if you have any questions, you can ask me directly. And I actually did plan on interviewing him. I still do. But it's not about Anthony Clark at this point. What it is about, I should say, is the fact that Justice Democrats are setting up a fantastic progressive to lose. There's no way he's going to be able to win against an incumbent who has this much experience, who has been fighting for these things for so long. And I mean, it's not just, it's legitimately about the strategy. Who's going to endorse you? So Anthony Clark, for example, talked about union pensions for unions and teachers, and which is government jobs in general, are sucking the state of Illinois dry. Now, I don't, it is what it is. That's his prerogative, and it's his no. I don't get why he would say that. But so he's not getting endorsed by the union. So we can count that out, right? So Danny Davis is part of the African American Caucus, of the Congressional African American Caucus and the African American Caucus of Illinois, and has been that longer than Anthony Clark has even considered running for office. Probably even longer than Anthony Clark has been born. So he's probably going to get their endorsements as well. And well, if you're not for teachers, not only you just said that teachers' pensions are costing too much money, and that pensions overall are costing too much money. So you just lost every demographic in the union world in Illinois. So I don't see how you could possibly be setting up a candidate for success when you are running two progressives against each other, if you are the Justice Democrats. I have to ask you, what is your motive? Now, people would say, well, this is just a one-time situation. Like, this isn't happening all over the country, right? No, you'd be wrong. They're doing the same thing in Florida. They're running another candidate against another progressive out of District 7 in Florida for the U.S. House of Representatives. The young man is, from what I've researched, is a great candidate. The problem is he's running against a progressive who just won her seat against a Republican. I don't get the now. These are, mind you, I've done my research on both the incumbents. I've gone through their Twitters. I've gone through their websites. They don't talk about Russiagate. They're not braggadocious about Hillary. Hillary would have won. Hillary would have won. Hillary should have won. They don't talk about, I wish they would talk about election fraud, but they're not talking about election fraud in the sense that Donald Trump stole the election. They're talking about the issues that Americans are dealing with every single day. And most of them are progressive issues. So I thought the Justice Democrats were about trying to get as many progressives in office as humanly possible. And it seems that that's not the case. What it seems like is that they're actually unseating progressives to put whoever they want in office, and thereby gaining control of the political atmosphere. Because make no mistake, if they wrote their platform for the Justice Dems. If you don't know, the Justice Dems write the platforms for these candidates. The Justice Dems help run everything for these candidates. And they've only had one winner thus far, but it was Ro Khanna, and Ro Khanna joined after he already won. And so, and I'm not completely sold that he's a progressive either. So overall, and this is so I figured out their strategy, and the Justice Dems strategy so far has legitimately been to run in all of the areas that Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama won decisively in their general elections, and like hope for the best. That's legitimately what they're doing. It's got to be the laziest political strategy that I have ever heard. And it's I'm glad that the candidates are getting exposure, because a lot of these candidates, don't get me wrong, I like a lot of them, but they're running against progressives, or they're running against, they're not setting themselves up for success. And I don't want to waste more resources on races that don't need to be won. We've already seen millions of dollars wasted in the Ossoff race. We saw billions wasted in the Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders election. How much more money and resources and time are we going to waste when we could be winning progressive races, Republican or otherwise, or Democrat or otherwise, Green Party or otherwise, in key districts that need to be won. Now, once again, I don't like the idea of Justice Democrats coming from a media conglomerate. I don't like it. And I really don't like their strategy. It's lazy, and it wastes the energy, time, and resources of great progressives. And that's what I don't like about it. Now, people can take that any way they want to. If they want to take it personal, that's on them. I don't care. So moving on to the next topic, since I have you all here. So what we're going to talk about today, let me see if I got, oh man, he sent me the wrong picture. Tim's supposed to be sending me a picture. He sent me the wrong one. So as most of you all probably know by now, Claudia Stauber from Cabin Talk and Debbie Luzigman from Sane Progressive has some words with us this whole week. There were some interesting words. Their fans and their supporters had some interesting words also. And at first, I actually was sitting back and watching. And I was kind of like, I was waiting to say something, because I'm like, well, maybe I don't want to jump in and cause divisiveness, because I'm sure that they're going to come to their senses and things will get better. I understand that people have misunderstandings, and once they talk to people, they will get why what they're saying is so problematic. I thought that this is what was going to happen. Yeah, didn't happen that way. So for those of you who don't know the story, Claudia Stauber went to an all-black meeting where it was actually supposed to be designated for all black. It was supposed to be an announcement made at the conference, but they forgot to make the announcement. Okay, it is what it is. So she goes, they still allow her and welcome her anyway, but they don't allow her to live stream, For those of you who don't know, Claudia Stauber is a German white woman with blonde hair, and I'm assuming at this point she was in a room full of all black people talking about black issues. And to be totally honest with you, I totally understand why they would not want a white person just streaming. What she said was that instead of asking them and saying, hey, why isn't it okay for me to stream, and why is it okay for that black woman over there to stream? I feel like I was singled out, and I would appreciate it if you gave me some insight and helped me understand why that was. She goes on this tangent on Facebook Live and starts essentially bitching. I mean, I don't know what other way to describe it. Where they're being divisive, black, I suffer too, blase, blase, you know, white privilege on the progressive world. You know how it goes with white privilege on the progressive side. It's a little bit different than white privilege on the right, but white privilege on the left is a little bit more disturbing to me. And there's a few reasons why. So there are so many problems with this entire situation. I'm really going to try and spend that much time on it, but good God, it needs to have time dedicated to it. And we need to have a talk, Claudia and Debbie. And we're going to have some real talk. I'm 28 years old, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who don't know. I am young, but I do have my experience. And I have, well, and more importantly, I would say, than anything else, the only reason that I have the experiences that I do and the only reason that I'm able to understand these situations in the way I do is because I listen. I shut up when it's time to shut up, and I listen. And I humble myself when it is time to humble myself. When I went into a Korean church, for example, the first time I went to a Korean church, for those of you who didn't know, I went to Korean church for 10 years. The first time I went to a Korean church, I wore sandals, and you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to walk into the sanctuary with sandals, and I was like, why not? I thought that in my head. What I did, though, at 15 years old, would say, well, what may I ask why not? Well, it's because of this, 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 and this. Oh, okay, I can respect that. I may not agree with it, but I can respect it. That's just a minor example. Another example is, if a group of women wanted to talk about sexual assault, and sexual harassment and rape, and they wanted to have their own private discussion about it, absent of males, I would not insert myself into that conversation and try to live stream it. And then after they've made it clear that they really, this is a real, this is specific to this is a meeting specific to their needs, specific to their empathy and their experiences. So I'm not going to jump in, try to live stream their meeting, and then give my analysis on something that I wasn't meant to give my analysis on that, which is why I wasn't invited. Why? Because no matter how much I can sympathize with the women, I would never know what it is like to be sexually assaulted as a woman. I will never know what it is like to be sexually harassed as a woman. I will never know what it is like to be a woman. I can sympathize with them, but I can't know. And if they told me, hey, can you not live stream this session specifically about rape and sexual assault of women, hey, you can sit here and that's cool, but don't live stream, because we're not here for opinions. We're not here for analysis. We're here to have a solution. This is a solution-based conversation with women trying to solve women's issues. I don't think that's too much to ask of anybody at all, especially me, a male. Hey, I can respect that. So imagine my concern when I read that Claudia made a huge hoopla and hubbubaloo about the fact that black people like to have their own space at this one event, on this one panel. That's all they asked for, was for their own space in this particular situation. And then once again, like I said earlier, instead of being mature, because if you were about the movement, if you actually understood black plight, if you actually understood what that meeting was about, you would have asked them and said, hey, is there a reason why I'm not allowed to live stream? Because guess what? You would have left that meeting all of the more educated if you would have asked them. That's it. And you may not have agreed with it, and it's okay that you don't agree with it. Perfectly fine. And nobody would have gotten mad at you for not agreeing with it. That's what you don't get. What people get mad about is when, and this is, I'm going to be blunt about this. What black people specifically get mad about is when white people try to tell us what we do and don't do, whether it's okay or not, and how we deal with our own situations. Because this isn't like some kid on the street who doesn't know like exactly how to articulate his thoughts. These are scholars. These are well-read PhDs. This is a Jamu Baraka. Like, these aren't people who don't know what they're talking about. These are people who've dealt with this themselves, dealt with it in communities, and have gone on to find solutions to heal these communities. So I'm pretty sure they would have heard you out if you would have listened, or if you would have talked and asked them. But instead you went to your audience, because your audience, you know, I'm like, this is very obvious in case any of you have never watched Claudia Stauber. Her whole audience is like 90% white women. So, and they're a bunch of yes women for the most part. Some of them push back, but for the most part, it's just, oh, Claudia is so sweet. Claudia is so this. I don't care about that. I want to know the truth. That's it. That's all I care. That's all if any of you have been following me for long enough, that's all I'm concerned with is the unmitigated truth. And the truth hadn't been told in that particular scenario. And so instead of Debbie being a good friend, Debbie Losingman, same progressive, being a good friend of Claudia and saying, hey, Claude, it might be a good idea if you take this video down because there might be a little disconnect in communication there. And no, instead, Debbie doubled down on what Claudia said, and then both of them, and this is, of course, over the course of a week, start talking about, but I've suffered with mental health issues. I'm a woman. I was poor at one point in my life. I was this. I have problems too. I'm a marginalized group too. You should listen to me. We shouldn't be divisive. Okay, there is, I don't know what's up with this epidemic in white progressivism, where they're starting to mimic the right when it comes to what they like to call color blindness. Because let me explain something to you, and it's very simple. Some people don't think about this, and oftentimes people would deflect. And this is going to piss a lot of people off. But once again, I don't care. It is what it is. So, and I wrote a status about this. Imagine, because there's a lot of marginalized groups out there. So let's go through all of them, right? Imagine being a woman and everything you have to go through. Now imagine everything you would have to go through if you were a black woman. Okay, imagine being mentally disabled in 1960, 1970. Imagine being mentally disabled in 1960, 1970 as a black male or a black woman. Imagine, just for a second, that you are handicapped. Now imagine being black and handicapped. Imagine that you are Latina. Maybe like you're from Argentina, you're from Brazil, you're from Puerto Rico. Imagine. Now imagine being a black Latina. Imagine that you're from India. Now imagine being a black Indian. Imagine that you're from, I don't know, Brazil. Imagine, like, do you see my point here? Imagine if you're part of the LGBTQ community. Transgenders have it super hard. Probably the second hardest out of almost every demographic, but guess what? Imagine being transgender and being black. There is no comparison. There is no but I. There is no but I went through. There's a difference between I'm broke because I decided to move out and live with my boyfriend, or I decided to go on my own and I'm going through a rough period of my life while I'm building myself up, and being generationally broke because the system was literally orchestrated to prevent you from being successful. You didn't have to deal with a Tulsa, Oklahoma with Black Wall Street. You didn't have to deal with a Wilmington massacre in North Carolina with the black Democrats who were taking over the Democratic Party in the South. You didn't have to deal with that. You didn't have to, literally 50 years ago, myself and Debbie Luzigman and Claudia Stauber couldn't drink at the same water fountain. There is absolutely nothing comparable, absolutely nothing comparable to being in this world and being black. Because no matter what marginalized group you were in, you're not black. If you get what I'm saying. Because you can be in any of the above listed marginalized groups, and if you are black, that's a whole different ball game in a whole different world that you have no idea how to deal with. And no, you probably have no idea how we deal with it, because it actually, we all pretty much, I think every black person has PTSD to an extent. And that's not a joke. That's not a joke. Whenever a cop pulls up behind me, I think I'm going to get shot immediately. Doesn't matter if he runs my tags. He could be passing by me. I think I'm going to get shot, and that's reality. So instead, once again, and I said this, and I quoted, and it was a very nice. I said it in a very nice way. I said, see, here's the issue, and this is on Debbie's status, on Debbie's video, not Claudia. I said, see, here's the issue with all of this, ladies, because it was like 95% white women. The women were saying, oh, but Claudia's so sweet. I'm almost positive she's not racist. How could anyone be so mean? She's so sweet, though. She didn't mean it. I'm sure we could just get over it. What about the movement? We shouldn't be divisive. Blah, 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 blah. And it's the argument I hear time and time and time and time and time again. And here's the issue with all those statements. Claudia called us divisive. The black people who tried to correct her and educate her. Claudia said, well, people, not Claudia, people were saying that we were Soros funded. People were saying that all the black people who tried to correct her were racist, actually. And instead of Claudia listening to us and learning and educating herself and potentially others in the process, she decided that she was going to block everybody and start boasting about how she wrote a couple of chapters about Black Lives Matter in her book. Ironically enough, one of the chapters that she boasted about was about how you have to walk up to black people in their communities and communicate with them and learn from them. How ironic, right? Really. Woo! Anyway, so I said very nicely in a comment on Debbie's video, just to try to help them understand and the people on the status understand. I said, hey, the issue with all this is you all are so much more worried about Claudia's feelings, her hurt feelings, and her ego, instead of worrying about all of the black people she offended, she insulted, and she blocked. Do you hear that? Do you hear that? I want you all to hear what I'm saying. Because it's one thing when people type this out, because we've been hearing this conversation all week, but I want you to listen to that out loud. They're worried about Claudia's feelings being hurt. But she is saying that black people can't have their own space. That when black people try to educate her, that we're being divisive. It was perfectly okay with her entire fan base when she said that because of a Noah, for those of you who don't know, watch her show, The Way with the Noah on YouTube. But because Noah was going out of her way to educate her along with several other minorities, she said, I'm never going to talk to a black person ever again because of you. That's what she said. And people are like, well, it's because her feelings were hurt. I don't give a damn. That is not permissible. So, because what you're saying is your book is full of shit. What you are saying is I would rather not talk, not learn, not become educated, not grow my awareness, not grow my understanding. I would rather avoid black people than to ever have to check my ego and my understanding about how to accept what they're going through and why they set the boundaries that we do. That is, people, her feelings were hurt. I don't care. Because if your feelings were hurt by that, and that reaction led to, oh, I'm just not going to talk to black people anymore, you know what that means? It means you were never in this for change. You were never in this to provoke progress. You were never in this for everyone. You are in this for the cause or the movement, but the asterisk at the top. There's a cause or a movement as long as it's convenient for me, as long as it's backed by people who look like me, as long as I keep getting all the exact answers I want. I encourage people every day on my videos to challenge me, as long as it's logical, as long as they're polite about it, as long as they, as long as it's based in, objectivity. I have no problem engaging with people and them telling me I'm wrong. Even if I am wrong, I will admit it and I'll go on about my business. But you told black people that we don't know what we're talking about our situation. And this reminds me of a time, I'm going to dedicate a little bit more time to this. This reminds me of a time of a friend of mine. We got into a huge argument at the People's Summit. And it was over miscommunication because I was explaining to her, she said she didn't like the way that women refer to themselves because of rap music. So that's why she didn't listen to rap music. And I told her, why not? She said, because I don't think that language is appropriate for a woman to refer to herself as. And I said, well, with all due respect, you don't get to determine if that's okay or not. And we got into a huge argument. Mind you, she's about 20 years older than, about 30 years older than me. And she's an older white woman and from the South. I'm obviously black and I'm younger. And I explained to her, the problem is, and when she said she didn't care, I almost lost my shit. Because what she was telling me at that point was, I don't care how you define your culture. I don't care how your people define what's important to you. I don't care how you people define or interpret your language, your communications, your methodology of communicating your feelings, your thoughts, your actions, and how you see yourself. Because if you know anything about black culture or hip hop culture, that's largely based off of how we communicate daily. And because somebody sees a word one way doesn't mean that we will see the word the exact same way. And so when she was dismissive of that, it made me mad because this is a person that I genuinely consider an ally. And I know she's an ally. But once we finally sat down and had the discourse, we were able to move on because she listened to me. She finally got the point that, hey, it's not about what you see it as, because it's not about you. We've had our culture hijacked, and that's another aspect that Claudia hasn't thought about. We have been constantly pimped out. We have been constantly pandered to. We have had our culture co-opted. People make millions off of us. People gain political offices off of us. And we rarely get any of the credit. We don't see any of the benefits. In fact, it's the total opposite. So when they see, and this is a legitimate concern, I'm sure y'all have seen the pictures of the young white women who go to Africa, hold the baby, say, I'm gonna miss this baby so much, taking pictures and all that nonsense. That's what they see when they have a white woman come in there trying to live stream a legitimate session to discuss solutions for black issues amongst black people. And you can disagree with that. Nobody said you couldn't. Nobody said you couldn't. But at least try to understand it. But instead, when you go on a blocking spree, and then to prove your point, somehow you start talking, you make a post about your Black Lives Matter chapter, and then you tag me and Tim to tell us to tell our friends, oh, look, I'm not racist, I wrote about Black Lives Matter. And it's like, bruh, I know you did not just hit me with the I have 3 black friends argument. I know that's not what just happened on this Facebook post right now. And that's exactly what just happened on the Facebook post. You tagged me and Tim because you assume that we're all friends and all the black people have this crazy, super black progressive network. And it's not a lot of us know each other, but you don't know if we know a Noah. You don't know who we know and who we don't know. Because oftentimes black people, we make our networks, unfortunately, we have to keep them secret because of situations like this. So the overall point I'm trying to make is, you say that this is about the progressive movement. And I challenge you, Claudia, and I challenge you, Debbie. Because Debbie, you know a lot of the shit you said was fucked up, to keep it quite blunt. I challenge you. Prove to us that this isn't about you. Humble yourself. Come out, make a video, and say, hey, I'm sorry. I thought I understood, but I didn't. Period. because that's all we ever wanted to hear from the beginning. It's just to say, hey, I didn't understand. I made a mistake. Let's move on. That's it. That's all. We're not hard people to get along with. Obviously, we went through 200 years of slavery. We're not hard people to get along with. But just show legitimate remorse. Show legitimate sympathy. Because if I'm not going to go to you about German culture and tell you why your practices are abnormal and why you should listen to me. So why would you come to us in our space and tell us what is and isn't acceptable, what isn't divisive? And while we're on this subject, we also need to discuss the fact that whenever it was black people that were so easy to target, you could be so specific and nuanced, and you didn't attack the whole anti-war summit as a whole. It wasn't, oh, everybody at the anti-war summit is bad because these black people wouldn't allow me to live stream. You didn't say, oh, it was such an establishment event. You didn't say that. You didn't say that. You made a nuanced discussion. You had a nuanced discussion about that particular situation in that particular instance that you didn't like, which I found really interesting for both you and Debbie, because for the People Summit, when we were specifically outlining things about the summit that we didn't like, we were all establishment pawns. We don't know what we're talking about. We're George Soros funded. But you see the difference, or you see the similarities. And while I was able to explain the nuances of the People Summit and what I did and what I didn't like about it, and while you were able to explain the anti-war conference and what you did and did not like about it, because I went and you went. And you didn't like an aspect, you didn't like how part of it was funded, and you didn't like the speakers. You didn't, and I didn't like, or obviously, excuse me, and you didn't like the speakers of the anti-war conference, even though I'm not quite sure how the anti-war conference was funded thus far, but you didn't, I'm sure that wasn't an issue as much to you as the speakers. But so when you had your speaker situation this time, you didn't go out and call the whole establishment. You didn't say, this is establishment ran, right? You just point out to the black people, it's got to be their fault, they're being divisive. So I think that you all both need to take a step back out of the limelight for a second and think about what you want for this movement. You need to think about whether you want to bring forth solutions, or do you want to keep building your fan base off of emotion and anger, because you're misplacing that energy. Yes, we know election rigging and election fraud is a problem. Yes, not all of us are happy with what Bernie Sanders has said. Yes, not all of us is happy with what Jill Stein has said. We're all just as wise for the most part, you know, a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but we're all just as wise as you are, as you both are. We know how to read. We get the news. We on Facebook. But there's a huge difference between them and myself and Tim Black and Noah and others. The difference is I've moved on to the solution stage. I'm not going to be mad anymore because I can't change what happened in 2016. I've learned from what happened in 2016. That's the difference. And y'all haven't learned from what happened. Y'all learned, but now you're still upset about it, and you're still angry. And when you're still angry, especially when you're yelling and like, you're not thinking rationally. And you think because you have a lot of likes and a lot of followers on a network that's primarily white women, so of course that's what you would have, like, that everybody is like, that's the right course of action. Guess what? Alex Jones has a lot of followers and a lot of likes and a lot of money also. That doesn't mean that he is taking the right course of action as a journalist. And we all have a responsibility that if I'm going to be the the journalist that calls out Bernie for what he does good, then I'm going to be the same journalist that calls out Bernie for what he does bad, and vice versa. Same goes for Joe Stein or any other politician or any other scenario. I'm not going to pretend someone is evil incarnate because I disagree with them. Because life is much more nuanced than that. And that is the real world. I understand we don't want to compromise with the establishment, and I totally agree with that sentiment. But once again, I don't want to fall into a situation where we're being divided by people who are ego-driven and trying to boost their numbers with those who are trying to find solutions and working and reporting objectively. And when you come out and instead of talking to that black delegation, once again, who could have easily educated you, these are some of the smartest black people in the world, they could have easily educated you on why they thought it was inappropriate for you to live stream. And like I said, whether or not you would have agreed with it, at least you would have not tried to air out your dirty laundry on live stream. That showed that you're more worried about people agreeing with you. And they were, because of course they were going to be quick to agree with you. Of course they were. That's your fan base. They all look like you. They would have felt the same way. But it's your job as a journalist to then go up and say, well, I know what my fan base would have done, but because I'm the journalist, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to find out why they weren't okay with that and learn from it. I think that's pretty reasonable, right? Does most people agree with that? Now, there's a lot more to this whole scenario, but I'm gonna get into that on a separate live stream video. But we're gonna move on because I really want to cover this. Now, as you all know, Justin Stewart is a gentleman from North Carolina who was arrested during a protest, and now he is being framed for multiple charges, including breaking and entering. And his bail is insane. His bail is, I think, something close to $50,000 or something to that extent. And right now, they are raising money to get him out of jail and help cover legal fees. Now, as you all know, for those of you who don't know, he is a black person. And he's in the South. He's in North Carolina. And you don't want to be black in the South, in jail, in North Carolina, when you've pissed off a bunch of police officers and law enforcement. That's usually how you end up suiciding. So we need to help him out and get him out of there as quickly as humanly possible. And I'm gonna see if I can find the link. And if I can't find the link here, I'll post it after the stream and after the show is over. But it's important that you all share this link going forward and donate. You know, donate $2, $5, share it and share his story, because it's a man who literally has done everything right, and he was just fighting for justice, exercising his constitutional right, and he ends up in jail and framed for armed robbery. Dude, stand-up guy, and many of you all are friends with him on Facebook. It's disgusting what our law enforcement is able to do to people who are literally exercising their unalienable human rights and civil rights. So please go. I'm gonna post that link at the end of the video, and I encourage you all to donate. So the last thing that I would like to talk about today, we had a lot to talk about today, right? The last thing I want to talk about today is Bernie Sanders, actually, because there's been a huge article circulating, right? Well, two main ones. But some of you got mad as hell, and I kind of agree, but once again, remember, as a group, we're trying to work on not being reactionary. We're trying to bring it in. Let's think about this from a logical perspective, right? Okay, Bernie Sanders transferred money from his account to the DNC for the Unity Tour, and people started freaking the hell out. And they saw 100,000 DNC Bernie Sanders, and they freaked out in Unity Tour. And I was like, whoa, let's take a step back, everybody. I'm pretty sure, if you don't remember, and I suggest that you all go do your history, Bernie Sanders made one clerical error during the primaries, and they blew that shit out the water in all of the media. Like he overpaid or he underpaid somebody or underreported by like $1,000. And they were like, he's committing FEC fraud. Let's tell everybody Bernie Sanders is a fraud. He doesn't know how to count. That's what happened in that one situation. Now, let's fast forward to a man who probably wants less trouble with the media. Just got a pretty good amount of exposure as far as his candidacy is concerned. And they probably, which probably went unreported, but I can almost guarantee it because I've worked within political parties or political organizations before, they probably requested it. The DNC is broke. They were like, hey, bruh, I need y'all to pay for this. So he did what he was legally required to do. Now, this is the best part. Many of you all have been, not many of you, but a lot of people have been so upset with me. You're shilling, you're, because you won't call Bernie the Antichrist, you're shilling for Hillary or for Trump, or I don't know who I support now. I've supported everybody. I've literally been shilling for Trump, Hillary, Bernie, Jill. I've been a shill for everybody and nobody has paid me. I'm still waiting on those paychecks to come in. But that's not the point. But Bernie Sanders, when he transferred this money, he didn't transfer it from his senatorial campaign. He transferred it from his presidential campaign. Yeah. And the FEC says that you can only use funds. He can't use funds from his presidential campaigns on senatorial races. So what else would he be using that for? And why would his presidential funds be going towards the Unity Tour? Unless, dun, 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 dun. Ladies and gentlemen, I've told you this from the very beginning. I am a man who observes patterns. Everyone is predictable. Everything is predictable. People's actions are predictable if you just pay attention. Now, what do we know about the establishment? People want to call Bernie a sheepdog, and it's actually, or a sheep herder. And it's like if they actually knew what sheep herder was, then they would know that he does not fall into that category. Because we can look at examples, clear examples of sheep herders. See, Obama was a sheep herder. Al Gore, in a lot of ways, was a sheep herder. Even we can look at the most recent example, right? Cory Booker is a sheep herder. They threw him out front and they wanted him to bring in as many minorities as possible, and it got thwarted. Elizabeth Warren is a sheep herder. Do you know what they don't do to their sheep herders because the sheep herders are supposed to unite people? They don't write slanderous articles about sheep herders in the Democratic Party. They don't call sheep herders sexist. They don't lie constantly on sheep herders. They don't do that because that hurts their point. If you knew, it makes sense. It did. I don't even know how to explain this, but the people that the establishment favor, they don't kill. If you, like politically, they don't do it. It doesn't make any rational sense. If you understand political strategy, you will understand what I mean. It doesn't make sense. Now, at the same time, on the other side of the fence, let's start from the very beginning, where Jane Sanders came out publicly and said during the primary that she knew that there was stuff going on. Her and Bernie were both aware of it. And she said, you all have to call it out because we can't. Their hands were tied. Okay? I took the message and I ran with that. Bernie Sanders himself came out and said, don't vote for who I tell you to vote for. Then Jane Sanders not only retweets that tweet right before the election, right before the general election, but pins it to the top of her Twitter so that we can all see it. And it made news. It actually made a few news publications. Now, we all know that Bernie was cheated. Nina Turner was supposed to speak in the convention. Tulsi Gabbard ended up being the only one that was able to endorse Bernie Sanders. And if you can imagine, there's a good reason that Nina Turner wasn't allowed to speak at that convention, because there's no way they want to have a black woman come out and endorse the old white socialists. That would turn the world upside down a little bit, don't you think? So, because they're thinking like Bernie's not done also. So, if you all, because I remember this at point, because I was crying. I remember I was outside, and I remember whenever they gave the final count, and then Bernie conceded to Hillary. When he suspended the rules, he turned his back to that camera, he walked away, and you never saw him in that convention for the rest of the week. That is not someone who is supporting. And his first statement was, I'm going back to being an independent. Now, we can fast forward. They're still slandering Bernie. Bernie's going on this unity tour. Bernie's introducing legislation and he's making it public. Bernie's still super active on Twitter. Bernie's still super active on Facebook. Bernie's still, they start the Jane Sanders Institute. People's Summit was larger than ever. And Bernie's being very careful about his words. He's saying things like, okay, Russia may have been implicated in election rigging, right? But then he goes on to say, oh, but the Democrats were the ones who lost in the election, have no doubt about that, okay? So he makes, and I don't agree with the first part, but I absolutely agree with the second part, okay? Then he'll say something like, yeah, Assad is a war criminal. But stop trying to go to wars in the Middle East that are unnecessary to fight. They're not our wars. If he does need to be unseated, it'll be done in the democratic way. He says stuff like that, right? So he didn't come out and campaign for Tim Canova, and I disagree with that also. But then I thought, man, if he actively endorses someone against Debbie Wasserman Schultz at that time, all this is gonna y'all gonna understand what I'm saying whenever I lead up to my final point. It would be doomed for him going forward, because there is one factor that 99.999% of the population continuously forgets to factor in. Bernie Sanders is an independent from Vermont, in a state where no matter what he wants to be, even if he wanted to be Republican or Democrat, he cannot register as either, because there is no political registration other than I am registering to vote in Vermont. And because of that, he is in a very unique situation. Where any time the Democratic Party deems that he is not going to be working within the best interests of the party, they can push him out and say that we're not going to run you. And they can deny him immediately. They were going to do it at the convention. It was threatened to him. It was going to be done. So Bernie has to walk a thin line. His rhetoric changed. His patterns of behavior changed. Whereas he was very open about his disgust and disdain for Debbie Wasserman Schultz, he's been a little bit more timid about it because he's watching his words. Whereas he was open about Tim Canova, he endorsed him nationally. He's a little bit more reserved. Now, there's a misunderstanding about the most recent article, by the way, about Bernie Sanders and Tim Canova. He was asked, is he going to endorse Tim Canova because his election campaign just announced? And what he was saying was that he didn't know that Tim Canova had announced his election. That's what he was saying. It's a total misquote. And if you know about the Miami Herald, they constantly attack Tim Canova under false pretense. It's a regular thing down here. So don't read too much into that. But even still, he's not going to be as bold about his endorsement of a Tim Canova-esque candidate because of a Debbie Wasserman Schultz. He's being very careful. He's walking his line. He's staying in his lane. However, if you look at what he's doing on the back end, he's exposing candidates by introducing legislation like the prescription drug legislation. He's still forcing the conversation about single-payer health care. He's still forcing a conversation about the military-industrial complex. And he's constantly in the spotlight. So, I'll leave you with this, ladies and gentlemen. Bernie Sanders is probably going to run in 2020. And he knows that if he doesn't act right, they won't let him. So let's have a little, believe in the process, have nuance, understand that life isn't as black and white as we would always like it. And with that being said, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you all. Thank you so much for watching. And always remember, find your balance. Peace.